The Naval Amphibious Base at Coronado was a place of constant, purposeful activity. SEALs trained relentlessly. Equipment was maintained to exacting standards. The shooting ranges, where some of the world's most elite operators honed their lethal precision, were kept in immaculate condition. Petty Officer First Class Sarah Mitchell was responsible for much of that immaculate condition. Every morning at 500 hours, she arrived at the primary SEAL sniper range with her broom, her cleaning supplies, and her meticulous attention to detail. She swept the brass casings that operators left behind. She reset targets. She maintained the equipment that had been used the previous day. She was, by almost any objective measure, invisible. Sarah was 43 years old and had been in the Navy for 22 years. She had started as an enlisted sailor, worked her way up through the ranks, and eventually become a senior petty officer. Most of her career had been in operational roles, but that was before the medical discharge. Most people at the base didn't know that part of her story. 5 years ago, Sarah had been a lieutenant commander. She had commanded a SEAL team. She had led operators on multiple deployments. She had made decisions that affected lives and shaped operations. She had been respected, recognized, and valued for her leadership. Then a spinal injury, a result of a parachute malfunction during a training operation, had changed everything. Surgery had been partially successful, but the injury had left her with chronic pain and limitations that made continued combat operations impossible. The Navy had offered her a choice: retire on medical disability or accept a position in the administrative support track where her physical limitations wouldn't affect her ability to do the job. Sarah had chosen to stay in the Navy. She couldn't command operators anymore, but she could still serve. She could maintain the range that operators used. She could contribute to the mission in a way that her body could support. What she hadn't anticipated was how completely she would become invisible. The same operators she had once commanded, some of them at least, came through the range. None of them recognized her. Why would they? She was the person sweeping, the person cleaning up, the person doing the support work that made their training possible but that they never really thought about. It bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Sarah was methodically sweeping the range one morning when a training evolution began. A SEAL sniper team, 4 operators, arrived to conduct long-distance precision shooting drills. They set up their equipment, prepared their rifles, and began the complex work of precision marksmanship at extreme distances. Sarah continued her work on the periphery of the range, careful not to interfere with the training. She noticed immediately that one of the snipers was having a problem. His groups were off, consistently high and slightly to the right. It was the kind of problem that could be caused by several things: improper breathing, trigger technique, wind calculation errors, or equipment issues. The sniper was young, probably mid-20s, and he was clearly frustrated. The senior sniper on the team, Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Thompson, was watching the shots with the focused intensity that came from years of experience. Sarah was sweeping near the equipment area when Chief Thompson noticed her. "Hey," he called out, "you work range maintenance?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said, walking over. "One of my guys is having shooting issues," Thompson said. "High and right pattern. I want to rule out equipment problems before we assume it's operator error. You know weapons systems." "I do," Sarah said. "I've worked with sniper weapons for many years." "Can you take a look at his rifle?" Thompson asked. Sarah examined the weapon carefully. She checked the scope mounting, the bolt carrier group, the trigger mechanism. She looked at the ammunition. She tested the weapon's zero. The problem, when she found it, was subtle but significant: a loose scope ring that had allowed the scope to shift slightly. The shift was small enough that most people would miss it, but it was exactly the kind of thing that would cause the shooting pattern Thompson's operator was experiencing. "This is it," Sarah said, pointing out the problem. "The scope has shifted. It's not much, probably a quarter inch, but that's enough to cause this pattern at distance. Thompson studied the rifle, then looked at Sarah with new respect. Good eye, he said. How did you know to check for that specifically? Experience, Sarah said simply. I've been working with these systems for a long time. As Sarah tightened the scope ring and helped Thompson's team re-zero the weapon, she was aware that one of the other operators, a younger sniper, was watching her with something that looked like recognition dawning on his face. Petty Officer Mitchell, the young sniper said, uncertainty in his voice. Sarah looked up. It took her a moment to place him, Petty Officer First Class David Rodriguez. He had been in her command 5 years ago before her injury, a promising operator even then. Yes, Sarah said, not entirely sure how to respond. You were my commander, Rodriguez said. Commander Mitchell, you led my first deployment. The moment hung there. Sarah saw the realization spreading across the faces of the other operators as they understood what Rodriguez had just said. The person they had been watching sweep the range, the person doing maintenance work, was the woman who had once commanded one of the most elite SEAL teams. Chief Thompson's expression shifted into something more complex. You commanded a SEAL team, he asked. I did, Sarah said. Before my medical discharge from command. I still have a few years of service left, so I chose to stay and work in support roles. There was an awkward silence. The operators clearly didn't know how to process this information. Sarah understood their confusion. In the military hierarchy, command authority was something different from maintenance. A former commander doing sweeping work didn't fit the expected narrative of how military careers progressed. You were a good commander, Rodriguez said, and there was genuine respect in his voice. You took care of your team. You made good decisions. Thank you, Sarah said. You were a good operator. I'm glad to see you continuing to develop your skills. After Sarah left the range that afternoon, she sat alone in the maintenance shed and thought about what had just happened. For 5 years, she had been invisible. And then, in a moment, that invisibility had been stripped away. She had become a former commander doing menial work. She wasn't sure which situation was worse. That evening, Sarah called her sister, who lived in San Diego and who had always been her sounding board for military career questions. They realized who I was, Sarah said without preamble. My old team. They realized I used to be their commander. How did they react? Her sister asked. I'm not entirely sure, Sarah said. Surprised, confused maybe. It's one thing to work for someone who commands a team. It's another thing to realize that the person who is now sweeping the range used to be in a position of authority over you. That must be complicated, her sister said carefully. It is, Sarah said. Part of me felt relief. Finally, maybe they'll see me as more than just the person cleaning up. But another part of me felt exposed, like the thing I was hiding, the fact that I'm not just a petty officer doing maintenance, but someone who used to command. That was suddenly visible, and I'm not sure how people are going to treat me now that they know. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the range at her usual time, 0500 hours. What she didn't expect was to find Chief Warrant Officer Thompson already waiting for her. Petty Officer Mitchell, Thompson said, I was hoping we could talk. They sat in the maintenance office and Thompson said something that surprised Sarah. I did some research last night, he said. I looked up your service record. You commanded SEAL Team 7. You had a 97% deployment success rate. You took your team into some of the most challenging operational environments. You were written up for command excellence. He paused. And then you had a medical discharge from command, and instead of retiring, you stayed in the Navy. And now you're maintaining the range. That's essentially correct, Sarah said. Why? Thompson asked. Why stay and do maintenance work instead of retire? You've got 22 years of service. You could have a pension. You could do civilian work. Sarah considered how to answer this. Because I still wanted to serve, she said finally. because even though I couldn't command operators anymore, I could still contribute to the mission, and because I needed to feel like I was doing something that mattered. Thompson nodded slowly. Your work matters, he said. What you do here, maintaining the range, making sure equipment is properly maintained, catching problems like the one you found yesterday, that directly affects how well my team trains. That directly affects how effective they are when they go into operations. He stood. I want you to know something. I'm putting out word among the SEAL community that you're here. Not because I'm announcing it in a way that makes you uncomfortable, but because operators need to understand that command experience doesn't disappear just because someone isn't actively commanding. You understand how operators think. You understand what they need, and that knowledge has value. Over the next weeks, something shifted on the range. More operators began asking Sarah questions about maintenance, about equipment, about how to troubleshoot problems. Chief Thompson would mention to visiting teams that the woman maintaining the range was a former SEAL commander. Most operators treated that information with respect. But not all of them. One afternoon, a young officer, Lieutenant David Carlson, arrived with his sniper team for training. Carlson was probably in his mid-30s, with the kind of confident bearing that came from successful operational experience. He was setting up his weapon when Sarah approached to check on the range. We're all set here, Carlson said dismissively, not even looking up at her. Just do whatever you need to do to maintain the range. Try not to interfere with our training. Something in his tone made it clear that he had been told Sarah was a former commander, and that he didn't think it mattered. Sarah said nothing. She simply continued her work, but she was aware of Carlson watching her with something that looked like skepticism, as if he was trying to figure out how a woman who was now doing maintenance work could possibly have commanded a SEAL team. The training evolution began. Carlson and his team set up and began their shooting drills. Within 20 minutes, one of Carlson's team members, a petty officer named James Foster, was clearly struggling with his shooting. Carlson seemed annoyed rather than concerned. Figure it out, he told Foster tersely. You should be able to handle this. Sarah watched as Foster continued to struggle. His groupings were inconsistent, sometimes tight, sometimes scattered. It was the kind of problem that required diagnosis, not just pushing harder. Without being asked, Sarah approached. Petty Officer Foster, may I observe your shooting technique? She asked. Carlson looked up sharply. He doesn't need help from maintenance personnel, he said coldly. Actually, Sarah said calmly, Petty Officer Foster appears to be having a technical issue that I might be able to help identify. The inconsistency in his groupings suggests equipment or technique rather than a lack of skill. She turned to Foster. Do you want me to take a look? Foster glanced at Carlson, who was clearly unhappy, but Foster also looked frustrated with his own performance. Yes, ma'am, he said. Sarah examined Foster's rifle. She watched his breathing and trigger technique. She analyzed his shooting position. Within a few minutes, she identified the problem. Foster was not properly accounting for wind conditions that had changed between shots. It was a subtle error in judgment, not a fundamental lack of skill. The issue is wind calculation, Sarah said. The wind has shifted since you began. Your technique and equipment are fine. You just need to recalibrate your wind correction for the new conditions. She showed Foster how to read the wind more carefully and how to adjust his calculations. Within the next set of shots, Foster's groupings tightened dramatically. Carlson was watching all of this with an expression of barely concealed resentment. When Sarah finished and stepped away, Carlson said to Foster, loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's fine. But remember, tips from maintenance personnel aren't the same as actual professional instruction. Don't get too reliant on that." The implication was clear. Sarah's advice was something nice but not really professional guidance. It was help from someone who was now a subordinate in the maintenance track, not from someone with actual command authority. Sarah felt something shift inside her. She understood what was happening. Carlson couldn't accept that the woman maintaining the range had once been a commander. More than that, he couldn't accept that her expertise was legitimate despite her current position. And she understood something else, that her invisibility had been, in some ways, easier than this visibility with conditional respect. That evening, Sarah didn't call her sister. Instead, she sat alone in her quarters and thought about her options. She could request a transfer. She could ask to be moved to a different base or a different type of work. She could even request medical retirement after all, collect her pension, and start a civilian life. But all of those options felt like running away, and Sarah Mitchell had never been the type to run. 3 days after the incident with Lieutenant Carlson, Sarah arrived at the range to find Chief Thompson waiting for her again. But this time, he wasn't alone. With him was a four-star admiral, Admiral James Patterson, the commander of Naval Special Warfare Operations for the entire Pacific region. Sarah's stomach tightened. An admiral at that level didn't visit the range for maintenance checks. Petty Officer Mitchell, Thompson said, and there was something significant in his tone. Admiral Patterson is here to observe sniper training. He'd like to speak with you first. Admiral Patterson extended his hand. Petty Officer Mitchell, Chief Thompson has briefed me on your background. I wanted to meet you personally. They shook hands, and Sarah was struck by the Admiral's direct gaze. This was someone who understood military hierarchy and military service at the deepest levels. Admiral, Sarah said respectfully. Chief Thompson tells me you commanded SEAL Team 7, the Admiral said. Is that correct? Yes, sir. I commanded the team for 18 months before a medical injury required me to leave command. And you chose to remain in the Navy instead of retiring, the Admiral continued. Yes, sir. I felt I could still contribute. The Admiral studied her for a moment. That's a decision that speaks to your character, petty officer. Not everyone would make that choice. Walk with me. As they walked the perimeter of the range, Admiral Patterson asked her about her command experience. He asked about the operations she had led. He asked about the challenges she had faced. He asked about how she had managed her team. Sarah answered his questions carefully and honestly. She could sense that the Admiral was assessing something deeper than just her operational experience. He seemed to be evaluating how she thought about military service, about leadership, about the nature of command and contribution. When they returned to the maintenance area, the Admiral said, I'm going to be observing sniper training here today. I'd like you to be present. There are some things I want to demonstrate, and I want you to observe. Throughout the morning, Admiral Patterson watched the SEAL sniper teams conduct their training. He observed several operators struggling with various technical issues, and he watched how different leaders responded to those struggles. Chief Thompson responded with diagnostic thinking and support. He helped his operators understand problems and work through solutions. But when Lieutenant Carlson's team was training, the Admiral observed how Carlson handled Foster's continued shooting difficulties. Carlson's approach was dismissive. He suggested that Foster needed to work harder, to focus more, to stop looking for excuses. It was the approach of someone who didn't understand the difference between effort and technique. At midday, the Admiral called all the operators and team leaders together for a brief meeting. Sarah stood at the edge of the group, uncertain whether she should be there, but the Admiral made it clear through a gesture that he wanted her present. I want to address something I've observed here, Admiral Patterson said, his voice carrying the weight of his rank and experience. There are different approaches to leadership. Some leaders believe that the answer to every problem is to push harder, to demand more effort. Those leaders often get short-term compliance, but they frequently miss underlying technical or tactical issues that are causing problems. He paused, looking directly at Carlson. Other leaders take time to understand what's actually causing performance issues. They diagnose problems before they prescribe solutions. Those leaders develop operators who can think critically and who understand the technical aspects of their work, and they develop stronger teams overall. The admiral turned to address the entire group. The most effective leadership comes from understanding the nature of the problem, applying appropriate expertise, and supporting your people in solving that problem. Expertise doesn't have a rank. The person who can diagnose a weapon system problem isn't less valuable just because they're not currently in a command position. He looked directly at Carlson. And respect for expertise should be based on demonstrated knowledge, not on current rank or position. The implication was clear. The admiral was making a statement about how Carlson had dismissed Sarah's expertise based on her current maintenance position. Furthermore, the admiral continued, I want everyone here to understand something. Petty Officer First Class Sarah Mitchell was a SEAL team commander. She led operators in complex operations. She has experience and expertise that most of you don't have. The fact that she's currently working in maintenance doesn't change her value. It changes how you should approach seeking her guidance. He turned to face the entire group directly. If any operator or team leader fails to show proper respect to Petty Officer Mitchell, or if any of you question the validity of her expertise based on her current position, I will address that directly. Is that understood? The response was immediate. Yes, sir, came from everyone present. The admiral then did something that created a moment no one in that group would ever forget. He walked directly to Sarah and came to attention. Then he rendered a formal military salute. The salute of a four-star admiral to a petty officer was unprecedented. It was a statement about respect that transcended rank and position. It said, this person's expertise matters. This person's service matters. The work she does matters. Automatically, every operator and team leader present came to attention and rendered salutes towards Sarah. Sarah stood for a moment, stunned, and then she returned the admiral's salute with the professionalism of someone who had commanded teams. The salute was held for a long moment, longer than strictly necessary, making sure everyone understood what was happening. When the admiral dropped his hand, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Thank you for your service, Petty Officer Mitchell, and for your continued contribution to our mission." Then he turned and addressed the operators again. Class dismissed. I expect to see improved respect for all members of this unit, regardless of current position. As the operators dispersed, many of them clearly shaken by what they had just witnessed, Lieutenant Carlson approached the admiral. Sarah could see him attempting to explain or defend his position. The admiral listened briefly, then said something that made Carlson's face flush. Sarah didn't hear the exact words, but the message was clear. The admiral was not accepting Carlson's explanation. In the days following the admiral's visit, the dynamic on the range changed completely. Operators began approaching Sarah with deference. Team leaders asked for her input on training decisions. Chiefs Thompson and other senior enlisted personnel made it clear to their people that disrespecting Sarah's expertise was unacceptable. Even Lieutenant Carlson changed his behavior. He didn't offer an explicit apology, but he began treating Sarah with professional respect. He even asked her opinion on a tactical question related to sniper operations on one occasion. But what surprised Sarah most was the broader conversation that emerged within the SEAL community. Word spread about what the admiral had done, a four-star saluting a petty officer, making a statement about respect for expertise regardless of rank. It became a story that operators told each other, a reminder that service and expertise took many forms. A week after the admiral's visit, Chief Thompson approached Sarah while she was working. "The admiral asked me to check on you," Thompson said. "He wanted to know how things have shifted since his visit. He also wanted me to tell you something." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "He said that what you did, staying in the Navy despite your limitations, continuing to contribute in a different way. That's the kind of character the Navy needs, Thompson said. He also said that your expertise in mentoring operators shouldn't be limited to informal advice while you're maintaining the range. Thompson paused. He wants to know if you'd be interested in a transition to a formal training role, something where you could work directly with operators, teaching them about weapon systems, troubleshooting problems, and the kind of technical knowledge that makes the difference between adequate and exceptional operators. Sarah felt something shift inside her. This wasn't about recognition for its own sake. This was about her expertise being valued in a way that would allow her to contribute more fully despite her physical limitations. "I'd be interested," Sarah said. Over the next months, the transition happened. Sarah moved from maintenance to a formal role as a senior instructor in sniper weapons systems and tactical decision-making. She was assigned to work directly with SEAL teams, teaching them the technical aspects of precision shooting and the kind of systematic thinking that made the difference in complex operations. And it turned out that Sarah had a gift for teaching. Operators responded to her instruction in a way that suggested they understood that she wasn't teaching theory, she was teaching from experience. She had led teams. She understood what they needed to know. She also understood something else, that her transition had been possible because the Admiral had used his authority to make her expertise undeniable. Her competence had always been there. But sometimes, competence alone isn't enough in hierarchical organizations. Sometimes authority from above is necessary to remove barriers that prevent merit from being recognized. Part 5, The Full Circle. 2 years after the Admiral's dramatic salute, Sarah was promoted to Chief Warrant Officer. The promotion ceremony was attended by Admiral Patterson, who had made a special trip to Coronado to be present for the occasion. After the ceremony, the Admiral pulled Sarah aside. "You've rebuilt your career in a different direction," he said. "You're not commanding teams in the field anymore, but you're making operators better. You're making the entire SEAL community stronger. That's a form of command authority, even if it doesn't come with a team." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said. "I couldn't have made this transition without your intervention." "I removed a barrier," the Admiral said, "but you did the work. You built a reputation as a skilled instructor. You earned the respect of the operators you teach. And you've become one of the most valued members of the sniper training program. That's on you." Over the next 5 years, Sarah continued to grow in her role. She mentored younger instructors. She developed curriculum for sniper training. She worked directly with the most elite operators in the SEAL community, teaching them the technical and tactical knowledge that made the difference between competent and exceptional. She never commanded a team in the field again. Her body couldn't support that anymore. But she had found a different way to lead, by shaping how the next generation of operators thought about their work, by teaching them to approach problems systematically, by passing on the kind of expertise that could only come from someone who had commanded at the highest level. And she was no longer invisible. When Lieutenant Rodriguez, now advanced in his career, encountered her at the training facility, he would always acknowledge her with respect. "Commander," he would say, using the title she no longer officially held but that everyone understood she deserved. Years later, when Sarah was approaching retirement after more than 30 years of service, she was asked to give a speech to a new class of incoming SEAL officers. These were officers who would one day lead teams, who would make decisions that affected lives. "I want to tell you about a journey," Sarah began. "I started my career planning to command. I worked my way up through the ranks with that goal in mind. And for 18 months I did lead a team. I made decisions about complex operations. I was responsible for the lives of exceptional men." She paused, looking out at the young officers who would become the future of the SEAL community. "And then I was injured, and my path changed, and I had to choose whether to accept that change or to fight it. I chose to accept it. I chose to stay in the Navy and contribute in a different way. And that choice led me on a path I never expected, a path that, in many ways, has been more fulfilling than the path I was originally on. She talked about her years doing maintenance work. She talked about the invisibility of support roles. She talked about what changed when the Admiral used his authority to make her expertise visible. "But here's what I want you to understand," Sarah said. "The Admiral's salute didn't make me competent. I was competent when I was sweeping the range. The salute just made it impossible for people to ignore that competence, and it created space for me to contribute in a way that used my full capabilities." She looked directly at the assembled officers. "When you become commanders, when you have authority, you'll have opportunities to make decisions about how people are valued in your organization. You can maintain hierarchies that prioritize certain types of roles and dismiss others, or you can recognize expertise wherever you find it. You can make it clear that service takes many forms, and that respect should be based on knowledge and competence, not just on current rank or position." She finished with a message that would stay with these young officers throughout their careers. The most effective organizations are the ones that recognize and value expertise wherever it exists. The most effective leaders are the ones who understand that leadership itself takes many forms, and that your contribution matters even when it's not the most visible or dramatic one. On her last day of service at Coronado, Sarah walked the range one final time. The same range she had swept years ago. The same range where she had become invisible and then visible again, and then had found a different way to matter. Chief Thompson was there to see her off. So were Lieutenant Rodriguez and several other operators who had trained under her instruction over the years. "What will you do now?" Thompson asked. "Civilian consulting," Sarah said. "Helping companies develop training programs and improve their operations. It turns out that expertise in systematic thinking and organizational development has value in the civilian world too." Thompson smiled. "You're going to be great at that." As Sarah left the base for the last time, she thought about the journey that had brought her from invisibility to visibility to a different kind of authority. She thought about the Admiral's salute and what it had meant, not just for her, but for the culture of respect in the SEAL community. Most importantly, she thought about something the Admiral had said during their final conversation. "The most important thing isn't whether you're in command. It's whether you're making people better at what they do." Sarah understood that now completely. She had made operators better. She had taught them to think systematically. She had shared expertise that could only come from someone who had led at the highest level, and she had done that not from the position of command, but from the position of expertise. That was a form of leadership too. Maybe not the kind she had originally planned on, but in many ways it was more powerful.